Hello, friends. I may or may not be huddled in my closet. I may or may not have taken a melatonin. I may or may not have a cup of tea so that I can sit here and share some stories so you have some stories to listen to while you watch me draw. I have thrown all sorts of art instructions up on the screen throughout this thing, and I figure you'll just pause my rambling if you need to read it, right? Okay, so I have been thinking about what story I should tell for the first installment on my art blog, my art YouTube. And I decided to go with one of my kids' favorites, which begins with me in a department store with my mom. It was, like J.C. Penney or Belk, one of those stores that smells like all kinds of weird perfume when you first walk in. And, I was a little kid at this time, right? Probably like I don't know. I feel like I was probably like 8 years old, right? Like everything that was the most fun in my childhood happened when I was like 8 or 9. Actually, I was probably a little smaller for this one because, okay, first of all, I got lost because I was hiding. I was hiding in those racks of like those circular racks of clothes because I was really bored. Of course, I was bored out of my mind. Who's not bored out of their mind when they're a little kid in one of those stores? But my mom actually lost me. And when she lost me, I lost her because I came out of the rack and I was like, oh my gosh, where did she go? And she had left the store to look for me. So I left the store to look for her. If you're listening, kids, don't do that. Sit down and stay put, right? Your parent will find you. I did not do that. I went wandering. And here's the part where I'm like, I know I had to have been younger because I was in the stage. I went through a stage where everything was potentially Narnia. Like, I was so determined to find the portal to Narnia. And as an aside, I was also kind of determined to find the portal to this like magical Nesquik land that I saw on a on a Nesquik commercial. Didn't find that either. But anyways, back to my story. When my mom found me, she found me standing in front of a toy store with a big stuffed lion in front of me. And I remember this actually because I was standing in front of it and I was begging it to be Aslan and like wake up and take me to Narnia already because this is so boring. I am so bored. Now come with me from the mall into my childhood closet where I am furiously at the back of my closet, which I normally avoided because it's terrifying back there. Who knows what's back there, right? But I'm in it. I'm braving the back of my childhood closet. So why, you might ask? It's because I lost my hamster, of course. I was always losing my hamster. She was such an escape artist. And I was completely sure that I had heard her inside my closet, so I followed the little chewing hamster sounds all the way to the back, past all my childhood rubble and whatever I was finding back there that I'm sure I was completely distracted by, until I got to actually like ran into the wall in the back of my closet, right? And so I put my ear up against it and I could hear her chewing. I'm like, oh my gosh, she's inside the wall. So, being a little kid, I do the next obvious thing, right? I start pulling at like we had that wood paneling. So, I start pulling at the wood paneling on the back of my wall, just determined to get my hamster out or find Narnia. Like either answer would have been completely acceptable. And I pulled on it. I actually like I ripped part of the back wall off. Again, kids, don't do this. Do not do any of the things that I did as a child. I was slightly unhinged. I pulled off part of the back wall and I put my hand through and I reached through and I felt like a soccer ball. And I was like, why is there a soccer ball? And then I crawled through and I realized that my closet, it wasn't Narnia and it wasn't my hamster. But next best thing, it was the discovery. You know what? This is actually really funny to me because my brain will not make maps. I could get lost in my own house. I swear sometimes I think about like in my current house, we have an upstairs, and I'm always like, where is the bathroom upstairs? What room is it over? I don't even know. My brain won't do it. It won't do cities. It won't do highways. It won't do towns. It won't do the mall. It won't do my house. Okay, I could get lost in my own home. And as a child, I was completely shocked and mystified when my hand went through the back of my closet, and on the other side, I discovered I was in my brother's closet. My closet connected to my brother's closet. And this was extremely welcome news because I got into my brother's closet and I sat for a minute. And it occurred to me that my brother had no idea that I could now crawl into his closet from my closet. That's amazing. And obviously, it was amazing because it meant that I could prank him. Listen, I was a great older sister, okay, in many ways. For example, my brother and I had walkie talkies, and I would read him stories. I would read him to sleep many a night on our walkie talkies, and I kept him believing in Santa for a very long time. Sorry, Wheeze. Also, and aside for the Santa thing, because that was high effort actually, he used to write letters to Santa and I would write him back. And sometimes I would write him back with my left hand and pretend like it was Rudolph writing back. And then he would write a really skeptical letter to Santa and I would write a very high evidence letter back from Rudolph with like chocolate chips stapled into the paper and scraps of leather and jingle bells. And I'd be like, these are genuine jingle bells and these are real leather scraps from elf shoes. And I think he really did believe me for a while until, the years passed and eventually he was probably just humoring me because he's a pretty great little brother too, honestly. Anyways, back in my brother's closet, little me was biding her time until my parents put him to bed, and I definitely sat there and waited quietly for him to fall asleep. And then I rolled out of the closet and I combat crawled across the floor on my belly and rolled under his bed and just waited there until it was time to be like, "Woo, little brother." And like poking the mattress from underneath. Definitely scared the living snot out of him and disrupted my parents' sleep for the foreseeable future. Okay, but in my defense, once my brother figured out it was me, because of course he did, because I wasn't just going to do it one time, right? I was going to do this every night forever because I was insufferable. And once he figured out it was me, he was completely inoculated against being afraid of any weird nighttime sounds or weird scuffling from under his bed or whatever, because he was always just like, oh my gosh, it's just my ridiculous sister. Every time, forever. So you're welcome, mom and dad. Also, speaking of disrupting my mom and dad's sleep, that reminds me of another story in which my dad took me to a tackle shop, which was pretty standard for us, right? And there was a big drawer of like discounted lures. What are they called? It's like the gummy lures. Like they're like rubber, like worms and like salamanders and little frogs and stuff. And as a little kid, I was just like, oh my gosh, free little toy trinkets. This is so cool. I mean, not free, but free to me because my dad was going to buy it. And I was like 4 years old, like whatever. Right? So dad told me that I could get as many as I could fit in like some little bucket that they gave me. And so I did like very happily sit down and choose all the salamanders and worms and frogs and little cute slimy fishing lures that I wanted. They didn't have hooks in them or anything. And then I got home and I was a little kid, right? So mom and dad are just so thankful that I'm busy. But what I was busy doing was jumping on their bed and throwing these little like fishing lures at the ceiling and they would stick. And oh my gosh, it was such a blast. So I'm just jumping on their bed and throwing them all up one at a time and they're sticking to the ceiling. And then it's like, oh, Sarah, come eat dinner. And I was like, oh, okay. And I just left them all and threw the bucket on the floor because I was tiny. And then my poor unassuming parents get me to bed. They're probably all worn out. They go lay down to go to sleep in their bed. And sometime around, 2 or 3 a.m., of course, these gummy worms and salamanders start unsticking and dropping on my mom's face one by one. And she wakes up screaming. I will never forget it. It was a prank, but it wasn't on purpose. It was kind of hilarious, though. Sorry, Mom. Love you. And speaking of nonsense and capers that happened when I was out with my dad is kind of a story generator because he's got the same neurology that I have. We both have weapons grade ADHD, so the stories just follow that, right? And anyhow, since now I'm telling you stories about things that happened when I was out with my dad, I am reminded that one time we went to the feed and seed store and there were baby ducks, which is always the most exciting thing ever, even as an adult, but especially when you're a kid. And he was, shopping. And I went over to the duck cage and I wanted to see them closer. And so I put my face right up to it and I still couldn't see them close enough. I really wanted to hold them, but they were in and closed really. And I put my forehead against it. And you guys, I got electrocuted straight into my brain. There was an electric wire around the baby ducks. And as an adult, I'm looking back on that and I'm like, why? Why did you have an electric wire around the baby ducks? And it zapped me straight in my forehead. And I fell over. Like I blacked out. Everything went white and then black. And then I was on the floor. I mean, I'm fine mostly, I think. So anyways, check for an electric wire before you lean against a baby duck cage, I guess. I don't know. Maybe this is just like a 90s thing. We all want to bring back the 90s, but like maybe not that part. I don't know. Here's another dad and brother genre story. The day I met my baby brother, which I will never ever forget. I remember going to the grocery store on the way over there. My dad had this van. It was a giant blue van. I almost said it had a yellow door, but that was a different car. We had a different car that was blue with a yellow door, but the van started with a pocket knife for some reason. And it was amazing. And I was so proud of it. And dad took me to the grocery store, and I remember playing The Floor is Lava the whole time. I was 4.5 years old. And when we got to the hospital, I guess to pick my mom up and meet my baby brother, um, we pulled into the parking lot and it was pouring rain. And again, Slady HD, my dad didn't bring a raincoat. He didn't check the weather. We got there and he was like, "Oh no, it is really a downpour, huh?" And he did not hesitate for 1 second before he dumped the groceries out in the floor of the van. And because he took the plastic bags, right? And he punched 2 holes in the bottom of one of them, which I then put my feet through and pulled it up. And then the handles, they went like over my shoulders. Can you picture this? And then he took another plastic bag and punched a hole in the top, and that one went over my head. And then the handles again went over, like under my shoulders, like my arms went through them. So that's like a whole body grocery bag suit. And then he made a hat for me out of another one. And then he put the other 2 over my shoes. And he was like, "Look at that. Right as rain." Right as the rain that is currently pouring down on us. And you won't get as wet. I have made you a rain suit. And I was even more proud of that than I was of the pocket knife that could start the van, I thought it was amazing. And my dad and I walked into the hospital, and there was a security guard who said, "Hey, nice rain suit." And I said, "Thanks, my dad made it for me." Okay, so another thing about the blue van that started with the pocket knife is that for many years, my dad and I would take it to Cape Hatteras, like for every Thanksgiving. That was our tradition, just me and dad would go. And it was my favorite thing because when I got to Hatteras, I could bring my bike. I could ride my bike all over the island. I could pretty much do whatever I wanted, which was amazing, of course. So the reason we'd be going to Hatteras, first of all, would be so my dad could fish so much, and also so that he could see some of his old high school friends who inexplicably lived there. He didn't grow up in Hatteras or anything, but he had a bunch of friends there for some reason. And we usually stayed with his friend Sue, who was the first woman ferry boat driver, and I don't remember whether it was just North Carolina or America. I probably should have looked it up. But anyways, it was notable, and she was a sailor. And she did talk like one. But here's the other thing. She rented a house from this man named Albert Jr., who was also a sailor. But she was a ferry boat driver, but Albert Jr. was like an actual, not that she wasn't an actual sailor, but he was like on the ocean going across, like to China and stuff. And I don't even know where he went. And also, like, what was he doing? Like, was he legitimately a pirate? I would not be surprised in the least bit if it turned out that that was the case. He was swashbuckling. Okay, he had tattoos all over his arms. Some of them were mermaids. He had mermaid knickknacks all over his home. The other thing about Albert Jr. was that he had this really remarkable accent. It was the Cape Hatteras accent, and it sounded like almost Australian and like also Scottish. And sometimes it was really hard to understand. Actually, you know what? I just realized that I have access to the internet and I have free will. So I went and located a soundbite or a couple sound bites for you guys of what the old Cape Hatteras accent sounded like. I actually don't know if people still sound like this because it's been such a long time, and I know that it was considered a dying dialect. I love linguistics and dialects. I think it's so much fun. So if any of y'all are nerds in this way like I am, and also just to give credit, I will link. I'll put links. What do you call it when it's YouTube? Links down below? I don't know. You can find them. I pulled from 2 YouTube channels to get these clips. The Language and Life Project, Outer Banks English, and Global BBC. Not gonna lie, made me a little emotional. Sounded like some of my favorite parts of childhood. So anyways, without further ado, here you go. Here's a few clips.
We'd be fishing, He said, "Come on, let's get going. It's hoy-toy on the sand soil. Last night the waterfall, night moonshine, no fish. What's the matter, Uncle Wood?" He said, "Get her going." On the sign side, sign like Pamlico sign. This is the Pamlico sign.
And they didn't think, they wanted to know if I was American. I said, yeah. So They said you talk funny. Said you don't talk like we do. Well, they didn't talk like I did either.
If they didn't like you, they wouldn't talk to you, would it, Jim?
He would leave and sail the seas for months on end, and then if I happened to be there, like if he happened to come back while I was there, he would teach me all the wildest sailing knots or whatever, and then eventually he'd just pass out on his couch for a really long time, you know. He had a neighbor who had a son who was about my age. His name was Andy. And my dad would sometimes give me like $5 in the morning and just let me go be free. And Andy and I and all of his friends would just ride our bikes all over the island. We go to the bakery, we buy Danishes, we go visit Sue's horses. There were always barn cats and kittens in the barn. It was. And then Andy and I would come home and we would fight over his casting net. Like we'd always have to bicker like we were siblings. But he would give me a turn with his casting net and I'd be able to, he taught me how to throw it into the sound. And whenever you pulled it back up there, it'd be full of all kinds of magic. Maybe an octopus if you're really, really lucky. And then Dad and I would always sleep in a tent outside in Sue and slash Albert Jr.'s yard. But it was really hard to sleep because the tree frogs were so loud. I'll never forget how loud they were. But I still loved them because if I woke up early enough, they were absolutely everywhere and I could catch them and hold them and look at them and watch them turn their heads and like those little wrinkles that they get on the side of their neck. Amazing. And then, like, late into the night, all the adults would be hanging out in the house and just laughing and chattering away, and there'd all be music and everything. And Andy and his friends and I would be, their houses are on stilts because they're by the ocean. And so we'd be under the stilt houses, playing in the sand. He'd be teaching me about, like, the sand lions and all the different patterns that you'd find in the sand and what kind of wildlife made them. And then we made little bows and arrows out of, I don't know, there were like these really bendy sticks. I don't think it was bamboo. Anyway, I'm thinking back on it and I'm like, it's very Neverland slash Lost Boy coded. Like we were so, but without the sad parts. And the other thing about the island is that the raccoons were all really bold. So they were always coming up onto the front porch to eat the cat food. And there was one night where my dad went out to run an errand or something and he left me by myself in Albert Jr.'s house with a calzone. I think this was my first experience with a calzone, by the way, and it was magic because, first of all, yum. Duh. But secondly, because there were raccoons and they were all hanging around on the front porch trying to eat the cat food, I'd be like, hey, gang, I'll do you one better. Do you want a piece of calzone? And I would crack the sliding glass door open like an inch and a half, and they'd reach through with their little criminal hands and take it from me. And then I would get to sit there. I'd close the door again. I'm being good, okay? I'm responsible. And I'd sit there and watch them through the sliding glass, just, holding it in their two little hands and munching away. Okay, fast forward to a new day, and I have been out biking with Andy and crew. But I have returned. I've come up the many steps of the stilted house and I have opened the sliding glass door. So here's the thing. I don't know why Albert Jr. had a giant box of Werther's Original candy on the coffee table, just open. So much Werther's Original candy. So much. I guess when you're a pirate with a dying dialect accent, you can pretty much do whatever you want. But I'll just have you know that the scene that I walked in on was Albert Jr. asleep on the couch, open box of candy on the coffee table, candy wrappers everywhere, and like 5 to 9 raccoons hovered around, opening them, again with the criminal hands, just popping candy in their mouth and tossing the wrappers on the floor. I do suffer from an overabundance of raccoon stories. I don't think I should tell most of them right now, so I think I'm gonna move on and tell you guys about how when I was a small child, my bestie and I made forts out of everything. We were all the time building what we called the fan tent, which qualifies as kind of a fort. We can start with that one. Have y'all ever done this? You take a sheet and you spread it out on the floor. And then you take a box fan and you put it at one end of the sheet. And then you pull the sheet over the box fan and you secure it with something onto the box fan. And then you go down to the other sides and you secure the corners of the sheet with something, books, rocks, something heavy. And then you turn the fan on and it blows up the sheet and it turns it into this nice, cool tent that is just lovely to hang out under when it's super hot outside. We also made ourselves a little fort out of the space behind. My family had a garage, a detached garage, and there was an embankment behind it because we had a meadow behind our house that was on a hill. So imagine the crack between the embankment and the garage. This was probably not a safe place for children to play. Again, I do not recommend emulating my hijinks. But somehow we secured a rope to the top of the embankment. We must have found a stake, a huge nail or something that we shoved into the ground and tied the rope to so that we could rappel down. I'm not sure if it counts as rappelling if you're just kind of shimmying down a rope onto the ground. But we had a detective club back there, so please understand, we were very busy and important. Also, the grass in the meadow, the weeds, the grass, often got taller than us, so we could go out there with an umbrella. I'm finding it kind of difficult to explain what these forts looked like, but we would clear out a little section in the middle of a patch of grass, super tall grass, and then we would pull the grass down around us a little bit and put the umbrella on top. So it was like a little grass umbrella hut. You can picture that. We brought a tiny table and some chairs out and put it in our grass hut, and a checkerboard and some other various board games. It was our board game hut, obviously. At some point, we decided that it was probably time we try to build ourselves a proper tree house. So my bestie and I did what you do. You scrounge around and try to find as much loose change as you possibly can. You empty your piggy banks. We counted up everything we had. And we begged my mom to take us to Lowe's. And I guess my mom figured she had some other errands to run, so why not? So she took us to Lowe's and we went to the cashier and we dumped out our little piggy bank like we were the little rascals or something. And we said, how much wood can we get for this? And the cashier counted it up and she was like, I think you might be able to afford one 2x4. So we said, all right, sounds good. That's better than nothing. And we bought our one 2x4. What really cracks me up about this is that my mom was just like, all right, sounds good. Put it in the car, whatever. We had an optimism and a magical thinking that could not be crushed. Obviously, we had a very serious meeting on the way home, and we figured out that all it was going to take to turn this one piece of wood into a proper treehouse was to choose the right branches to put it on. Of course. So we deliberated over the tree and the branches, and we made a very careful choice. And we worked together to bring the one piece of wood up to where it was supposed to go and place it just exactly correctly. And once our one piece of wood was in the tree, it was perfect. There was just one problem, which was that we couldn't really both be up there at the same time. We weren't really sure it could hold the weight of two people, so we would have to take turns. And since there was really no ladder or stairs to speak of, it was kind of hard to bring anything with you when you went up there. So we spent, I don't know, the better part of a week or so building a whole elaborate pulley system, which was extremely exciting because I could put a sandwich in the little bucket and I could pull it up to her and she could take it out. And listen, all I'm saying is everything was awesome until the branch broke and my friend fell out. And she did get hurt a little bit, but she was okay. And we learned about simple machines. So I'm just saying, I think that was a win overall. It was a very, very 1990s life. I mean, like the kids these days are saying, I'm definitely from the 1900s. We were a little more supervised at my house when my bestie came to see me. And that's not a criticism on her parents. She was one of 8 and with 6 at home. So 2 had moved out. I think she had other like half siblings somewhere far away. So anyways, her parents were just a lot more overwhelmed than mine were because it was just me and my brother at my house. I mean, it wasn't much more supervision at my house. We spent most of the time at my house in the meadow. We would pack a lunch for ourselves before we headed out for the day because standard exennial, we're not coming home until the street lights come on, although we didn't really have street lights because we were out in the boonies. So we just didn't go back inside until it got dark. And when we were at my house packing our lunch so that we could go spend the entire day in the meadow and the woods, we would always pack a thermos full of beanie weenies, canned pork and beans, and hot dogs. And then we go get some honeysuckle and some blackberries. I must be starting to get really hungry because now I just want to tell you about the food that I remember because that's what we ate when we were at my house. When we were at her house, sometimes we'd get really, really lucky and her mom would give us each $2.50 and she would say, you can take this and go down to, we called it the little store. There was a convenience store right next to her house. Looking back, it was a little sketch, but as kids, we did not care. We were oblivious to that. And $2.50 each in 90s dollars felt like $1,000,000. And we had a whole system down because her mom would say, you can have this, but you have to get something that counts as dinner. And we were like, no problem. And we would go down to the store and we would spend 10 cents on ramen. And then we would spend the rest on chips and dip and candy and Coke or pop or whatever it is that you say. She used to say pop because her family was from Michigan. And then we would take our haul and we would go on up to her sister's room where we would bribe her with some of the candy that we got to let us watch her TV. And we would watch the TGIF lineup. My 90s homies might remember Step by Step, Boy Meets World, maybe? I don't know if Boy Meets World was ever on TGIF. Family Matters, Full House. Back at my house, when it was time to eat our beanie weenies, we would go find our very specific fallen tree that had roots that had come up out of the ground and made a pit. And we would sit in the pit and eat our beanie weenies. Man, now that I'm telling all these stories, I'm like, I'm not sure most of the stuff we did was safe. I will have you know that I was even making an active effort not to tell the stories in which I know we were being very unsafe. These are supposed to be the safe ones. Speaking of which, Bestie and I made sure that she got snowed in at my house for the blizzard of 93 so that we wouldn't have to be in an amazing snow day alone. I don't know what the snow was like out here for that, but we were in Western North Carolina at the time, and everybody in Western North Carolina remembers the blizzard of 93. It just kept snowing and snowing and snowing, and we had I was a kid, so in my memory it was like 10 feet of snow, but I'm sure in reality it wasn't quite that much. But it was awesome! It was actually so much fun. And you know how I was saying that our meadow was on a hill? It was on a hill. Well, it was a hill. And it kept going and sloping up and up until it got to the woods. And we had about 8 acres of meadow and woods. And about halfway up the meadow part, there was a wood chip pile because my dad had a wood chipper. And there was a wood chip pile that was taller than me. And when it was covered in snow, along with the rest of the meadow and the woods, it became a ramp for our saucers. Which brings me back to us doing unsafe things, because this was not a safe thing. We were starting way up in the woods. We would fly down this mountain. I don't know how we didn't hit every tree on the way down. And we would be going so fast by the time we hit the wood chip pile ramp that we would fly off of our saucers. I almost said toboggan because my bestie used to say toboggan because Michigan. Okay, so we would fly off of our saucer, catch air, the saucer would keep going, and then we would land back on it by the time we got to the bottom, and then we just fly down to the end of the mountain. And somehow the physics of all of this worked for us. And it never crossed our minds that it might be different for someone who was a different size. So my younger brother is 4.5 years younger than me. And until he graduated high school, he was much smaller than me. He's taller than I am now. But for a long time, he was very tiny. And when we were kids, he was also very cautious. He loved his routines. He loved knowing exactly what was going to happen next. He did not like surprises, no changes there. Where I was always looking for something new and exciting, he was not a huge fan of novelty. So when I started trying to convince him in the middle of this blizzard that flying down the mountain on this small circular disc and then vaulting over a giant wood chip pile covered in ice was a wonderful idea, he was a little skeptical. And he was absolutely right to be skeptical because I begged and pleaded and promised him that it was going to be so much fun. And I would not have been wrong except for the fact that when he went over the wood chip pile and came off of his sled, the physics were different because he was smaller and he didn't land back on his sled at the bottom. He actually landed on the ground, and I didn't know because it was covered in snow, but my dad had a trailer next to the wood chip pile with a metal hitch on it. And it was the bummest luck because he came down smack on his forehead. He was okay. I mean, he wasn't okay, but it wasn't like a hospital trip not okay, you know. He didn't really sled anymore for the rest of the day, though, I don't think. Of course, I felt absolutely awful, and I do remember that, but I don't really remember what else happened after that except for my bestie and I continuing to play in the snow until it got dark outside, and then we came inside and took our boots off. And there was so much ice packed down in our boots that it was like a boot-shaped ice block around our feet. And this may be the exaggeration of a child's memory, but I'm pretty sure we stuck our feet directly in the fire and just waited for it all to melt off. This is what I remember as extraordinarily fun, by the way. Isn't that something? As an adult on a snow day, what would be extraordinarily fun is to have to do nothing and to sit inside where it's warm and maybe spend the whole day reading and painting and listening to music. But as a child, it's like, no, I want to risk death by vaulting over the wood chip pile. And then I want to pack the snow down in my shoes so hard that it turns into blocks of ice and not come in until it's dark. Hey, we're almost done. I really want to tell you guys a story about the mockingbird that I rescued in high school. I have tried to rescue many, many songbirds over the course of my life, and they are very, very hard to keep alive, heartbreakingly so, because it's really, really hard to keep them from aspirating when you feed them. And somehow, by some fluke of magic, I was able to do it one time with a mockingbird when I was in high school. His name was Scout. And I really want to tell that story, but it's going to have to wait until part 2. Thank you so much for being here. I really hope you're working on your own creative endeavors and your own paintings and all of your own things. Also, for legal purposes, the songbird thing is fiction. Hee. Later, taters!